Ndërkohë, do kaloja me prezantuesen e radhës, profesoresh Eleonora Foschi, e cila edhe ajo ka një background mjedisor, por nga pikpamje inxhinieristike, ama punon edhe në departamentin e menaxhimit në Universitetin e Bolonjës, Itali. Doktoresh Foschi është pedagoge pranë këtij departamenti dhe në Bologna Business School, gjithashtu ka një eksperiencë shumë të madhe në projekte ndryshme Horizon 2020 në lidhje me ekonominë qarkulluese. Do i kaloja pa humbur shumë kohë, do i kaloja fjalën Eleonorës. Vetëm do i lutesha shumë që të mbeteshim brenda 10 minutësh. Grazie Eleonora.
Thank you very much, Professor Gans, for your introduction. And I'd like to thank the organizer of the event for the brilliant organization. So I think that this event, this webinar, is extremely important for a proper implementation of circular economy in the country. And it's my pleasure to continue the discussion started by Professor Mialai and broaden the scope to the firm level. So next slide, please. Thank you very much. So while in the past, circular economy was mainly limited to the most proactive city or companies, the current situation related to critical supply chains make the circular economy an essential part for the sustainable economy. And this is the first topic we are going to address today, followed by a practical contribution on the proper implementation of a circular design process for circular economy, where life cycle and system thinking cover a fundamental role, as we will show in the 3 successful business case we will present in the last part of the presentation. So as I mentioned before, the post-pandemic market is, next slide, please, characterized by huge price volatility and raw material shortage. I just sourced this chart from the finance website and demonstrate the huge variation in price from one day to another for the commodities, such as gold, that is mainly used in electric and electronic equipment, while silver is basically used in the automotive industry. And also plastic materials are characterized by a huge variation in price from 30 to 60% from one day to another. And these challenges should be seen as opportunities. These companies are identifying new suppliers or experimenting alternative materials and do an unexpected investment to ensure the stock in their warehouse. But at the same time, the supply chain disruption is seen as the most important risk for companies, as reported in this survey performed by Allianz in 92 countries. And supply chain is also challenging when the demand of product is high while there is a lack in raw materials. And this is what is reported in this figure, that is an Italian news related to a Ducati, a leading company of the automotive sector, that speak about an upside down crisis. So we have the demand, but we are not able to meet the demand because of lack in raw materials. So, and then circular economy is also emerging as a trending model if we consider this new professional figure named circular economy manager, that should integrate many skills and expertise. Please, next slide. Skills not only in the technical field related to knowledge of product processes and supply chain, but also transversal skill related to data analysis and problem solving, and with deep skill, that means having a comprehensive understanding of the system in which the company is located to address all the potential issues in the economic social and not only technical field. So at the same time, the circular economy manager, as anticipated by the Professor Kunduri, should not work alone, but in a multidisciplinary team where thinking about the system and thinking about the life cycle of the product or service is essential. So circular economy is an emerging trend, but at the same time, as Professor Miandari said, is often limited to recycling. Next slide, please. Is often limited to recycling, or in other cases confused with sustainability. And this is also demonstrated by the dynamic environment that there is in academia, where more and more scientific papers are going to publish that contribute to increase this confusion, since there are more than 114 definitions on circular economy. But as you can see from the chart below, until now, circular economy has been addressed from the technical point of view, without considering the implication on business model. And at the same time, what is important is to connect the concept of value in traditional business model with the concept of value in circular economy. What happens in traditional way of doing business is that companies have no information about what happened at their materials in future step of the value chain, for example, in the consumption stage or at the end of life. And this is the framework in which circular economy works. So circular economy requires, as I said, a system perspective, but is also important to push not only a technical innovation, but also a social innovation, able to produce, to provide the so-called disruptive innovation. Next slide, please. And we invested a lot on recycling and introducing new waste governance, ambitious recycling rate. But if we look at the European waste management performance, the results are still not satisfying. For example, the recycling rate of post-consumer waste in 2018 did not exceed 42%. And the majority of materials are downcycled rather than upcycled. This means that we have looked at end-of-pipe measures without considering the contributing effects or the contributing factors hampering a cost-effective recycling. And at the same time, recycling is not the only strategy that we can implement when we speak about circular economy. At first, it's important to reduce our dependence from raw materials by slowing and narrowing the resource loop. And only in the final stage, we can address the recyclability and so maintain the intrinsic value of materials in future production cycle. Next slide, please. And so this means that circular economy and circular design processes require a combination of multiple strategies that should be adopted in each step of the value chain. In this circle, we can see here, from the supply chain to the manufacturing, the consumption, the reuse stage, and only finally the end of life. And another important part in circular design stage is having a clear understanding of our mission, if related to create a sustainable sourcing, a more sustainable manufacturing from the qualitative and quantitative point of view, if we want to push a radical innovation in the habits of a consumer, and only at the end of life speak about recycling and recyclability. Next slide, please. So what we can understand is that the circular economy should be considered as a form of innovation, an innovation that can affect the product itself, but also the supply chain and even more the business model. So we can now introduce 3 different business cases of companies implementing a circular design process according to system thinking and life cycle thinking. Let's introduce the first innovation process that is represented by this Italian company manufacturing packaging made of cellulose. Here, the challenge was to provide a recyclable packaging for frozen food. As you can see here in the picture, this packaging is not recyclable since the main body is made of Tetra Pak, this 3-layer material made of aluminum, paper, and plastics, while the cap is made of plastic materials. So in circular design process, eco-design is important, but even more the simplification. Here, the solution provided by the company was to simplify the packaging by using only fully paper-based packaging. So the benefits are not from the environmental perspective, since we reduce the use of plastics, we reduce the consumption of energy during the manufacturing stage, but we also reduce the emission of carbon dioxide during the transportation because of the better stackability. And this is a clear example of implementing life cycle in the design process. So think about the externalities that our product, our service can create along the value chain and address the challenges internalizing the externalities during the design. Next slide, please. Yeah, and now we speak about another process that affects circular economy and in particular the supply chain. This is another Italian company working in the production of texture and solution for fashion and luxury. And the problem was related to the supply of virgin cellulose that is mainly imported from South America. And even in this case, the circular economy process starts with solving a challenge, characterizing the area in which the manufacturing plant of Favini is located. So they started producing the paper named Shiro by valorizing the local algae that are present in the lagoon of Venice. These algae were dried and substitute virgin cellulose to the material composition. According to this pilot test, they started to produce other types of papers with different types of input materials, such as the materials used to produce the second type of paper that are made of agro-industrial scraps. So the company started to use the scraps coming from the agro-industrial sector, valorizing orange, lemon, coffee, and so on, and producing the crushed paper. And these other tests contribute to create economic benefits by implementing one-to-one collaboration with specific food companies, valorizing their waste in the manufacturing of their packaging. And finally, we have the most ambitious and also challenging from the technical and economic point of view, that is the framework of strategies supporting the redesign of a business model. And among them, the product as a service system cover a fundamental role. And this is the case of an innovative startup based in Helsinki that make reuse packaging for the e-commerce sector. One of the main concerns related with product as service is the so-called rebound effect. That is the transposition of emission from one stage to another stage of the value chain. In this case, this concern was solved by implementing a return back system using the local postal service, so without introducing additional transportation system that can cause additional emission of carbon dioxide. So to conclude, the takeaway message I'd like to provide today is not limiting circular economy to recycling. but consider recycling and recyclability part of a wider framework, including many strategies. And also, when we consider the recyclability of packaging, for example, let's have a look at the local waste infrastructure to be sure that the circular packaging is effectively managed in the local waste recycling and valorized as a secondary resources. Another important element is the role of a consumer, especially in product and service system, since consumers facilitate the preservation of value in future consumption stage. So thank you, and thank you for the invitation, and that's all from my side.